Hello, welcome to our first installment of our tutorial for ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia. Please have your study guide downloaded. If you are doing a live version on Google Doc, you should have a separate piece of paper out so you can write the answers down and then go back in and type them at the end of the tutorial. I'm not going to go over the whole thing. You're going to come check back for future tutorials as we move through the unit, okay? So let's get started. Where does the name Mesopotamia come from, and what does it mean? The name Mesopotamia came from modern archaeologists and historians. The term means the land between the rivers. If you remember, we went over this, I think, in session 21. There's the Euphrates, and there's the Tigris. Why were Sumerian communities called city-states? It was made up of city-states, large cities and surrounding areas, each controlled by a strong ruler and ruled by different empires during different time periods. How did the environment of Sumer impact the civilization living there? The Fertile Crescent made this area soil good for farming, but the droughts and seasonal flooding made it a challenge. So since they couldn't really predict when the floods were going to come, they had to kind of innovate, and they did this by finding solutions to control the floods and water their crops year-round. They dug ditches, built levees and canals to accomplish this. When the snow melted in the spring, they had their reservoirs and dams to collect the water and control the flow. Okay, the Zagros foothills. This comes from a warm-up that you did in session 23. What development caused food shortages in the Zagros foothills, and how did the people solve this problem? So around 5000 BCE, farmers in the Zagros foothills, they had grown so much, they were so good at farming, they actually increased their population, and then they ran out of land to grow food on to support the population. So villages began to suffer from food shortages. So driven by the need to grow food and to eat, because that's what we got to do as people moved out of the foothills and onto the plains. This region became known as Sumer and the people of the Sumerians. What was one major factor that made farming difficult in the area of Sumer? Okay. So again, the uncontrolled water supply. There was not a lot of predictability for them in terms of droughts and floods, and they needed to have sort of a happy middle ground. And during certain times of year, the spring, in particular, rain and the melting snow from the mountains overflowed the riverbanks, creating this rich soil. But again, great for soil, bad for your house, bad for your crops. Why did Sumerian rivers flood in the spring, and how did the people control the flooding? Again, this comes back to they had to innovate. They couldn't predict all this stuff, and so they created irrigation systems for their fields. Okay, and if my visual here shows you an irrigation is the artificial application of water to the land. Why were levees built in ancient Sumer? So they built levees along the sides of the river to prevent flooding, all right? So it's a big embankment you can see in the picture. So when the river rose, it would catch the overflow, so it would not actually flood the land. And then the opposite of that is during the dry time, they would allow the water to flow through the holes and into the thirsty fields. Why did the irrigation system become clogged in Sumer, and how did the villages cooperate to solve this problem? So they had to maintain them. All the silt coming through from the rivers at certain times of the year started to clog up their systems. And different city-states, and they were all sort of being benefited by these big irrigation systems, but they had to maintain them, and who was going to be responsible for that? So they had to cooperate. They came together to build and maintain this complex irrigation system. They had to show cooperation. Sumerians building strong walls of mud and bricks is an example of what theme of geography. This is human environment interaction, which is people modifying or adapting to their environment to meet their needs. What innovation helped the people of Sumer protect their city from attack? Around the cities, it goes right back to the slide we just saw. Around the cities, Sumerians began constructing strong walls out of mud bricks that were baked in the sun until hard. The Sumerians also dug up moats outside the city walls to help prevent enemies from entering their cities. Most people lived inside houses within the walled cities, but the farms were outside. So in a case of attack, the farmers fled the fields and into the safety of the city. What two types of communities did ancient Sumer transition from between 3000? That's a typo. Sorry, guys. Hang on. Okay, sorry about that. There's a typo, which means there's a typo on your study guide, so go ahead and fix it. The two types of communities that Sumer transitions between 3000 and 5000 BCE, they went from being villages into city-states. So the independent city-states fought with each other. They built walls and dug moats around their cities. The solutions to the challenge they faced by Sumerians had transformed Sumerian farming villages into walled city-states. What does it mean for a society to have a stable food supply? So if you have a stable food supply, it means you have more than you need. You have surplus. Okay, so not only does it mean that if you look at the cartoon, people have gone from hunting and gathering to farming to now having more than they need. It means that you don't have to, not everybody has to be a farmer. There's a surplus, everybody can be well fed. It means your population is going to grow. It's also going to mean that people are able to do other jobs for a living, and civilization and society benefit from this. What invention most affected the food supply in ancient Sumer? The cedar plow, hands down, made farming more efficient, faster, with less labor. So as we talked about, it had a metal spike at the end, or a plow at the end that dug a furrow, dropped the seeds. You attached the plow to a beast of burden like an ox, and you didn't need as many people. And it was so important to their civilization, they actually thought it was a gift from one of their gods. Okay, what belief did the Sumerians have about the king that helped strengthen the social order? They believed he got his power from the gods. Okay, that's how they kept law and order. They were very religious people. They feared the gods. They feared angering the gods, and so angering your king would anger the gods. It was in your best interest to keep him happy. What were some of the responsibilities of the king in Sumer? He raised the army, he made the laws, he collected taxes, and he organized labor for building projects. Remember, he's got to protect his people, and so he needs an army. He's got to protect his people. He's got to protect his people from outside invasion, so he needs an army. He needs to protect people from each other, so he makes laws. He's got to pay for his building projects, and so he has to collect taxes. Why were the scribes so important to Sumerian government? They wrote everything down, including records and laws. How did the Sumerian people express their religious beliefs? By building ziggurats. What evidence shows that Sumerians lived after the Stone Age? Well, we talked about the plow. It had a metal tip. So the fact that they were using metal indicates they were around after the Stone Age. Which invention made it possible for Sumerian armies to use chariots? Okay, a chariot is like a two-wheeled wagon you can see in this picture that you tied up to a horse or several horses. You stood on top of it holding the reins and it pulled you. And this couldn't have happened without the wheel. Which innovation added strength and beauty to Sumerian buildings? So we haven't really talked about this in specific, but it's going to be on the test. So they actually built things like aqueducts, and in their building structures, they had this arch structure that you can see. And they're really, arches are structurally sound, so they can withstand things like a battering ram or an earthquake. Made their construction last a very long time as well. What evidence found by archaeologists show the Sumerians were not prehistoric? Well, prehistory is the time before we wrote things down. Since they wrote things down in cuneiform, they clearly were not prehistoric. Why would the Sumerian cuneiform be important to a historian? Well, very simple. It gives us evidence of how they lived. They wrote stuff down, we read it, we interpret it, we figure out what life was like. What was a problem caused by Sumerian city-states' independence from one another? Well, they didn't always cooperate. They fought, and because they didn't have a central government, one person ruling over them all, it left them vulnerable to attacks from each other or other stronger groups. What political feature made Sumerians different from the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians? So they didn't have a strong central government that ruled over different groups. Sumerians were just the city-states living, and they were trading with each other and they had a common culture, but they weren't cooperating with each other under one rule of law. And so they fought with each other. Under the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, they had one empire, under the, I'm sorry, I cannot speak, under the umbrella of one big empire. Made them strong. What did the, I'm going to pause it here because you guys are going to be doing this for next, in session 23. So good job. Make sure you keep reviewing your notes. Just don't take your notes, use your notes. And if you're going to come to tutoring on Monday, make sure you bring some questions to ask me, okay? Anything I did not cover on the study guide is because we haven't learned it yet. And check back for the second installment of our tutoring. Thanks. Have a good afternoon, guys.